Hello everyone, I'm Nikhil Ravichandran, and today I'll be talking about the use of product lifecycle management in structural optimization. So the very first thing is what is structural optimization? So structural optimization is basically a method in which we take a material, apply boundary conditions and loads on it, and we try and see which are the areas which does not have stresses, and we try and remove that material from the original parent. So that is doing this is called structural optimization. So why do we do this? The very obvious thing is that we are removing material, and as a result, we are reducing the weight of the component. There are benefits associated with reducing the weight, such that the very first thing is that we are reducing the amount of material going into it. So we are directly cutting the cost of material into this. The second thing is that when something is lightweight, it generally runs faster. As a result, we are improving the performance of the overall product. So the next point, if we see, is what are the requirements and what are the data that is involved while doing this process of structural optimization. So the few things to note is that we'll be requiring a 3D model of the part. Along with that, we will be requiring the load data, the constraints, things like that. Uh, so these are the basic things that are required. But on top of this, we need other things like the material information, the material properties of that. Also, we'll be designing it for a life of the equipment. So we will have to have a target for how much time that this equipment has to work. Then fatigue loading comes into play with time, and also we need to worry about what are the different kinds of environmental factors that this product has to function under, and we have to collect all that data. So this is also the another aspect of it is we need to consider the aesthetics of the product in order to make sure that it is basically sold in the market. So these are about the inputs that are involved in the structural optimization stage. Um, Also, there are large amount of outputs that are generated because it is an iterative process. Like in every iteration, we'll be gathering a large amount of data, and we will definitely want to store all this data in some place so that for in future, if something goes wrong, we always can refer back to it. So this is where PLM comes into picture. So using the features that are available in a PLM software, we'll be able to store all this data and associate it with the parts. Not only that, using the PLM workflow that is available, it is also possible to systematically give tasks to people and make sure that everything is recorded in the meanwhile. So this just looks at a few challenges that come into play when we talk about structural optimization and its integration with PLM. So the first thing that we have already talked about is that structural optimization is an iterative process. As a result, this takes a long amount of time. Again, in every iteration, there is some amount of human interference that is required, and whenever human interference comes into play, we always have to consider the fact that errors could happen, and as a result, it could lead to some uncertainties in the whole process. Then, as we discussed in the previous slide, a large amount of data is involved whenever we are doing a structural optimization problem, and we need some method in order to capture all this data and store it in a secure place. So the other thing, when we talk about the integration of a PLM interface with an optimization software, so while individually these are established, while connecting them, it can sometimes happen that they are not working hand in hand. So there could be a need to generate a specialized PLM interface that can interact well with an optimization software. Um, then the next thing I want to talk about is the different types of structural optimization. So if you could see over here, there are three types: size optimization, shape optimization, and topology optimization. So size optimization basically means having control over the parameters, and and removing the unnecessary material so that we get a structure that performs as good as the initial one. In case of shape optimization, we tend to target the profiles of the structure in such a way that it basically functions as it is supposed to. And when we talk about topology optimization, in this we actually add features into the product. As you can see, there is no hole or any slot over here, but based on the load and constraints, these loads are added, these slots are added into the image. So we can see that like all these types of optimization has to be integrated with the PLM, which is some kind of a challenge. The other thing to note is that the output of the output of a structural optimization software is generally not directly suitable for engineering applications. As a result, there has to be a method in order to convert these models into PLM. So this is the first paper that I had gone through as a part of my literature review. So in this paper, the author basically talks about developing a system in order to perform a multi-objective optimization of parametric models. So the author proposes that this is done in 3 steps. So the first step involves human interaction. So this is the phase where the user gives all the inputs, like the design parameters to be optimized and all other design parameters. Then he sets up the entire model tree of the structure. And also this is the phase where he is giving all the constraints of design into the PLM software. So what in the second step, the PLM software generates an Excel containing all these information, which this Excel is then later on given as an input to the optimization software. So the other thing to note is that in the first step, the data that was given was only mentioned in the global level. So in this step, the global data is propagated all the way to the last element, taking into all the physical laws and the constraints that have been mentioned by the designer. In step 2, along with these two things, the third thing that happens is that the CAD is generated based on the model tree and all the parameters that have been given as an input. So this model is used in the third step as an this is basically given as an input to an FEA software to cross verify if the optimized values have come into play. So moving on to step 3, the Excel containing the values that are to be optimized is given as an input to the optimization loop. So over here, the author has used a genetic algorithm in order to optimize the whole structure. So how this works is that this optimization loop runs, and this input is again fed into the FEA in order to make sure that these are optimized. Then once it has the initial values, these values are then again given to the based on the FEA results. These values are again modified, and this keeps on happening for some time. So once this is done, the final values are given back in step 2, and again the final 3D model is generated, and this 3D model is then finally again cross verified with an FEA software to make sure that all the basically it is optimized and everything is under control. So this is the second literature review that I've gone through. So if you notice in the previous review, it was mainly about parametric models and it was mainly related to the size optimization. So this paper specifically talks about shape optimization. So the author observes that for applications like aerospace, traditional methods that are used for optimization are not very effective. This is because the profile is so complicated that you generally need a lot of design variables in order to explain the entire profile. So what the author suggests is to use something called as a gradient based optimization uh, in order to perform this optimization. So it is a multi-step approach. So the first step of this process is that there is an algorithmic differentiation is done of the open cascade technology, which is a 3D software using an ADOL-C. So in this step, what is basically happening is that the geometry of the structure, we try and find out how the geometry changes as we change the input design parameters. So as you can see, there are two sub steps to this. First is the parametric approach, and the second is the NURBS approach. In the parametric approach, the geometry, we try and find out how the geometry changes as we do small changes to the parameters. In the second approach, it is based on the B-splines. As a result, we try and find out how the geometry changes as the control points of the B-spline changes. So this is the first step. We have found out the uh, sensitivity of the geometry with respect to the control points. Now in the second step, this model is input to a CFD software, and in this software we find out the CFD sensitivity, that is how the results change with respect to these key points. So now when we have both these sensitivities, we can combine them together and calculate the total gradient. And the result of this is that this process gives us the values that can be entered into the next iteration, so that to get a more optimized result. So the values that we receive into this, the next step is to again input these values into the original model and run this whole process again. So this process is kept on repeating for a number of times till in this step we find out that there is not a lot of further optimization that can be done. So this is about the second paper. The third paper talks about topology optimization. So this slide, the first thing shows how topology optimization is very critical to structural design. As you can clearly see over here, we take a bar of this huge size and we apply the boundary conditions in the loads, and it can reduce material up to this much, and this actually guarantees that this can work for a good amount of life, the required amount of life basically. So obviously looking at this, we would want to try and leverage this technology a lot. However, there are a lot of challenges to it. The most important one is that this output is not in the form of a 3D. Like it cannot be directly used as a 3D software. So that is one major problem that the author has identified. This paper is basically the author basically tries to generate 3D models out of a topology optimization results. So the type of topology optimization that has been used for this paper is called solid isotropic material with penalization. So over here, author also mentions one important thing is that there is a parameter called simp value volume function. Simp volume fraction. So this basically controls the amount of material that is available for optimization. So if that value is set to a low amount, like 2.5 to 3%, then this is the type of output you get. If that value is set to a medium amount, like a 20%, then this is the type of output you get. So obviously these are two different kind of designs, and like you'll need very different approaches in order to convert this to 3D. So for this paper, author has restricted the study to this type of results that is obtained. So he calls this beam types of approach because in the end it looks like a connection of beams. So this is just an overview of the SIMP method that is used for optimization and how the output is smoothed. So as you can see, firstly, a solid block is taken on which the loads and boundary conditions are specified. So the first step is that the entire structure gets meshed and it is run through an FEA analysis. So based on the stresses that are generated on this, then after a few iterations, this structure is basically converted into this kind of a shape where the optimization software tells us that okay, this is the amount of material that you actually need in order to take this load. But the thing to note is that this image has been zoomed in over here. So the output that is generated is not smooth. Like it basically cuts off the tetrahedrons which does not have a lot of stress, and as a result, it is a very rough structure that is formed, which is not obviously suitable for a CAD approach. So so this whole structure needs to be smoothened out. So the author discusses two types of smoothing process in this. So in the first image over here, he uses a lapless type smoothing. The disadvantage over here is that the material shrinks and the output that we get is not really suitable. So the author, after trying out a few methods, he came out with something called as a combination of the Tobin and Laplace type smoothing, and he observed that applying this to the output of the topology optimization software gives a output that is very suitable for CAD conversions. So in this slide, I explain how the author has converted the smoothened structure into a final 3D product. So this is the output that we got after smoothing from the previous slide. So the first step is that a skeleton is derived from this, which is basically almost like the main point of this entire structure. So using that, a skeleton is derived. But the thing to note over here is that these skeletons do not have a uniform cross section, so they keep on changing. So the approach that has been used over here is that the cross section area at each point has been mapped. So we get the entire distribution of cross section along this entire skeleton. So once we have that, we normalize the cross section to try and make that this end, like each member has a uniform cross section. So obviously this will lead to some changes in the skeleton, and that is what happens in this image. So after normalization, this is the skeleton that is obtained. So now this is again just a cross check that we again try and distribute the cross section across this, and in this result it can be seen that each member has a fairly uniform cross section. So now using this and the value of cross section that is assigned to each skeleton, we can a 3D is basically generated, and this 3D is in a form that can be used in commercial CAD softwares. So this can be used as an input to the PLM software. So these were the literature reviews that we have done, and on this slide I summarize whatever we have learned from this and how PLM is basically suitable with structural optimization. The very first point observes that size, surface, and topology based optimizations can be converted to 3D. So we have now reached a stage where the output of structural optimization can directly be taken as an input to the PLM software. And also as observed, like it over here it requires a lot of human touch. Like someone has to download it from the PLM system, input it into the PLM, the optimization software, and the result comes as a optimized one. So all this can be automated as we saw in the very first paper, and PLM is basically very flexible, and you can generate web-based PLMs on your own in order to create such customized operations. As a result, we'll be taking the human intervention out, and the entire process will therefore be much more faster and much more accurate. The other thing to note is that when we bring PLM into the picture, we have features called check-in and check-out. Basically, we have an entire database in which all the data has been stored. And if I as a user want to work on a specific product, I have to check the object out of that data and into my workspace. So what this ensures is that there is a single master data. So like if I am working on it, someone else on my team will not be able to edit the part. So that is the feature that comes into play when we use something called as PLM. As a result, repetitive work does not take place, and it is only because of this feature that we can actually allow more than one person to work in a project. So this is the main feature that enables collaborative working, and since we have a lot more people working, we can entirely shrink the timeline of entire projects, especially that of optimization problems. Along with that, as we discussed, there is a large amount of data that is involved whenever we do a structural optimization. So all this data can be saved and it can be associated to the parts, the 3D CAD models that are generated in the end. Um, as a result, like through for the entire life cycle of the product, we have this data readily available in the form that we want for any future reference. Also, so the end result of all this is that when we take structural optimization and integrate it with PLM, it enables us to fasten the entire process. And as a result, the output is that we have components that are quite light in weight. As a result, the entire performance of the product has been improved. And also, these are very cost effective products, as a result of which we'll end up saving a lot of material and the cost. So I think this summarizes how PLM can be used in conjunction with structural optimization and generate really great results. That's it for the presentation. Thank you very much.